Okay, ready.
Perfect. All right. Can you see me clearly, right? You can see my signing clearly. Just Mary Angela.
Hi, sorry. I was setting up with someone else's computer and I wasn't here. So what do you need from me? I'm just now here.
Are we ready to go ahead, or what are we doing? Are we ready? Are we live streaming? Oh, okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. My apologies. All right, perfect. All right. Hello, all. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I just want to apologize for the delay. Apologies. We had some technological issues with technology, so please forgive us. We apologize. Before we continue or proceed, we just want to explain, who are we and what we look like. So I'm a Black woman. My hair is in a bun to the back. I have on a white cardigan, and inside I have a light pink or peachish color shirt with a red and white bracelet and a light pink watch on my other hand. I also have on glasses with back frames, and it's tinted. The lenses are tinted. Um, my background is a light cream color, just describe to you my background. So my name is Tashai Whitmer. My role is a moderator, so I interact with you, I interact with our panelists for our discussion this morning. I just want to welcome you all, welcome the public, people, whether you're deaf, private, companies, private sector companies, public service personnel, where they work with government agencies such as churches or schools, organizations, everyone who is watching, welcome to our webinar. And the topic is Communication Matters, and how the Disability Act and the deaf community and how we relate and how we're included with that in Jamaica, in the Jamaican society. So that is the goal of our discussion for this webinar, today. So welcome. We have an agenda and we will proceed as such. Hopefully you guys will enjoy watching and you will resonate with the webinar. And after you leave today, you can say, okay, thank you for this information. And we can apply the information that we've gotten from this webinar to our organization, to our agencies, to meet the needs of the wider public. So it means
So we're ready to proceed. JAD Executive Director is Kimberly Marriott Blake. Welcome. We'll be getting the welcome greeting from her. Over to Kimberly.
okay. And so Kimberly Maria Blake, she sent her apologies. She's not able to show up this morning, and that's fine. So we're just going to proceed. So we will have a special remarks on an important topic, which is the Disability Act 2014, is established here in Jamaica for all. And so how does that relate to the deaf community and how does it match to the deaf community? And her name is, the person who gave the remarks is Janelle Williams. So Miss Janelle Williams. But before we introduce her, we would like to give you, her background, where is she from and etc. etc. So she is an attorney at law with over 7 years of experience at the Jamaican bar. She has skills in public speaking, so she travels and does public speaking, in leadership, advocacy, and also she has worked or completed a 7-year assignment as a senior judicial clerk at the Supreme Court of Jamaica. And while she was there, she was involved and has made a significant input on the interpretation of the law in relation to the constitutional rights and freedom, that is. So right now, her role is at the JCPD, and she is the legal officer and corporate secretary at the Jamaica Council for the Person with Disabilities, which is a statutory body of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So she works together with that ministry, and we just want to make her welcome, Miss Janelle, our keynote presenter for this morning.
Thank you for that introduction. Just following on the precedent set earlier, so
we're waiting to spotlight the interpreter.
Okay. can go ahead now.
Yes, all good. Thank you.
So I am wearing a multicolored dress. There's orange, there's white, there's green, quite a lot of colors, blue. So that's the dress I'm wearing this morning. I have on a pair of purple cat eye glasses, a gold necklace, 2 gold earrings, and a gold and black watch. My hair is burnt orange and it's very low cut. All right, so that is to describe Janelle Williams, your speaker for this morning. And to make it even clearer, I'm wearing a striped dress. Okay, so we are here this morning to consider briefly. I am a brief speaker. I really pride myself in not speaking very long. So we're considering briefly the provisions of the Disabilities Act and how it relates to persons who are deaf. I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint. Is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, great. All right, so what I've done here is just to say Disabilities Act, inclusivity, the order of the day. Okay. So the act was passed in 2014, but it took effect on February 14, 2022. So the act is approximately 2 years old, and it contains a provision that it is to be reviewed. So its content is to be looked at again within 3 years after it took effect. So we're in that 3-year period now, because come February 13th next year, the act will be 3-year-old. Now, the act is also supported by some regulations which were passed in 2021. There are codes of practices being developed by the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities that are also of legal effect under the act. So together, all 3 pieces of legislation, both the primary legislation being the Disabilities Act, as well as the regulation and the codes of practice, that is the 3-tier legislative framework that is governing disabilities in Jamaica. I coined an acronym there, RCOP. So the RCOP, A is for the Act, the Disabilities Act. R is for the regulations, and the COP speaks to the codes of practice. Now, the Disabilities Act has 5 objects, 5 goals. One of those goals is to reinforce and promote recognition in Jamaica that a person with a disability has the same fundamental rights as any other person. So that's the first goal, to reinforce that point. Same fundamental rights. Secondly, it is to promote the individual dignity and autonomy of someone with a disability. So persons with a disability are entitled to their independence, their freedom of choice. They can choose as they are minded to. The third goal is to ensure that persons with disabilities are effectively included in every sphere in society. So no exclusion, but fully inclusion. All right, so we look at 3 goals. So same fundamental rights as everybody else, freedom and independence, as well as inclusion. The other 2 goals are to prevent discrimination. Now, that's a big word. And we're going to look at what it means in a little while. But the act also prohibits, meaning it restricts and it says no, there should be no discriminating against persons with disabilities. And the fifth goal is to promote respect for disabilities as a part of human diversity and humanity. So just as all other things tend to arise as a part of humanity and we have to treat with them, the same thing with disability. It's no different. It's just another part of, or another facet of human diversity. So those are the 5 primary goals. So remember, same fundamental rights as anybody else. Your independence and freedom to choose. Your inclusion. No discrimination. And disability is just another facet of human diversity. Now, the JCPD, the act is set up in parts, and part 2 speaks to the role of the JCPD. Pretty much, the JCPD is a government body that is entrusted with the task to perform duties that will ensure that the goals that I just laid out to you are achieved. So JCPD has the mandate, JCPD has a role and a responsibility to perform duties that will ensure that the goals of the act are met. Now, there are some must-know terms coming from the act. The act has a definition section, which is part 1 of the act, and from it I pulled what I call 7 key definitions that all persons, especially persons with disabilities, must know, because knowledge is power. So once you are empowered, you can call out things that are okay. I'm still being heard. Okay.
You had frozen, but we're good with you now. Please continue.
Okay. So the
Thank you.
the first term is discrimination. What is discrimination? This is any kind of treatment that separates, bars, or limits a person because of their disability. It's an unfair treatment because of your disability. That's what discrimination speaks to. Then we look at who is a person with a disability. Now, the person with a disability, the act defines it as a person who has a long caregiver. Who is a caregiver under the act? Now, the caregiver can be a parent. It can be the legal guardian of the person with a disability. It's not limited to a parent in terms of biological parenting. It can be a legal guardian. So this is somebody who has an order from the court saying they're the guardian for this person, and it can be anybody who is responsible for the caring of this person in terms of health, financial, and the like, as it is listed there. So it's a broad definition that can capture quite a number of persons. Reasonable arrangements. Now, reasonable arrangement is what the act requires entities to implement so that persons with disabilities can have access. Reasonable arrangement is what the act asks persons to implement so that persons with disability can have access. So there's a definition there, but that is just me putting it briefly for you. So any necessary and suitable change or adjustment that do not cause a disproportionate or undue burden but is needed to ensure that a person with a disability can enjoy certain benefits, rights, and treatment. Once this is required and there's no undue or disproportionate burden on the person who has to provide it, then it ought to be implemented, and it is called a reasonable arrangement. Now, in a little while, we look briefly at the Disability Rights Tribunal. You can, as a person with a disability, you can raise an argument that this is a reasonable arrangement that's needed. For example, because reasonable arrangement includes things like auxiliary aids and services, so equipment, devices, etc. So you could raise the argument that, okay, this is needed so that I can access this particular building or this elevator. And the person against whom you are making the claim is saying, no, I can't provide that. That's so much money. It's going to be a disproportionate or undue burden on me. Well, the Act says that the Disability Rights Tribunal will determine whether or not it is truly a disproportionate or an undue burden. The Act also defines disproportionate or undue burden. So it says this includes the nature of the benefit to be gained or the detriment likely to be suffered by any person concerned, the effect of the disability on a person concerned, the financial circumstances of the person who is claiming that they have a disproportionate or undue burden. And the rest is provided here. So pretty much where somebody says, no, I can't provide this because it's an undue burden or it's disproportionate, then the Disability Rights Tribunal will examine the total circumstances. They will look at the extent to which this particular reason the extent to which the person is able to provide it, and then make a ruling accordingly. The Acts also speak to alternative dispute resolution. Now, what alternative dispute resolution speaks to is using non-court methods, non-legal binding methods to see how best you can resolve issues. So like negotiation, conciliation, facilitation, mediation, arbitration to settle a disagreement. So this is where you use a mechanism where you can sit with a third party. So the complainant, which is the person making the complaint, and the respondent. Now, the respondent is the person against whom the complaint is made. So what alternative dispute resolution facilitates is for the complainant and the respondent to sit in a room with a third party, and for that third party to hear both sides and then make a decision. But please note that alternative dispute resolution is voluntary. You cannot be forced to participate in the proceedings. No party can force the other side. It is voluntary and both persons must consent. Access or accessibles. Well, access under the Act, it speaks to in relation to premises, persons with disabilities have the freedom to enter in, approach, communicate with, make use of, or move within any premises. In relation to benefits, access means the freedom to make use of any benefit, and in relation to communication, access means the capacity to receive and make use of information. And when we say access, we know we're not just speaking to physical access, but we're also thinking access to services and access to information. Now, Part 4 of the Act has a general clause that prohibits discrimination. So it says a person with a disability has the right to enjoy privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment. And then 25 says a person with a disability should not be treated differently or unfairly because of their disability. So this is the clause that generally says persons should not discriminate against persons with disabilities because of their disability. Part 5 is a section that looks at access to education and training. And we can see the terms there. A person with a disability is not to be denied enrollment or attendance at a school or a training institution because of the disability. But the Act puts a duty on the educational or training institution, whether it's public or private, it doesn't matter, to provide the necessary support to ensure that the person with the disability has the most reasonable access to the education or training facilities, has access to facilities in the least restrictive environment. The person, if they're a student there, They're not placed at a disadvantage because of their disability, and that reasonable arrangements are provided to facilitate their education. So what the Act does is to put the responsibility on the training institution or the educational institution to ensure that persons with disabilities can access the educational or training provisions. And it speaks to caregivers also. If we look at the other slide, it tells us clearly that the Ministry of Education has a responsibility to provide a reasonable arrangements within the education system so that persons with disabilities may be educated. So that responsibility of ensuring that persons with disabilities can access education is on the Ministry of Education. Part 6 speaks to employment. No, an employer is not to treat a person with a disability differently in terms of the terms on which they employ that person, the opportunities for that person to be promoted or receive any other benefits or to participate in training. They shouldn't dismiss them because they have a disability. So steps must be taken at all times to see how best the person with the disability can be accommodated within the work environment. Again, we see that word of reasonable arrangements. Yeah. If the physical structure of the work environment is as such that it would hinder the participation of the employee who has a disability, then again, the employer has a duty to implement reasonable arrangements so that the physical structure is not an hindrance to the person with a disability working there. Another instrumental provision in this act is that where someone acquires a disability after working, whether you acquire it on the job or off the job, or you are in the employment of this place and then you acquire a disability, then the employer has a duty to take steps to redeploy the employee. So, for example, if you are working as a driver and you are now blind, clearly you cannot drive anymore. But what the act is saying is that the employer is to find another post that is now proportionate or commensurate, which is the term the act uses. It's now commensurate to what you are able to do and place you there in such a manner that you don't once it is not creating a disproportionate or undue burden on the employer. Part 7 is speaking to political life and public life. We just had an election, and so pretty much this section is speaking that except where the individual has a mental disorder, so that's an exception. So persons, if the disability is one of a mental disorder, then this section do not apply to that person. Any other disability though, this section does apply, and it speaks to persons being able to participate in political life, the opportunity to vote, using appropriate or accessible facilities and procedure, the opportunity to be elected to a political office if you so desire, and to perform any function of government, and to be involved in political parties. Public life, again, the exception is where the person has a mental disorder, but otherwise, the person with a disability is free to participate in civil society and to form and join organizations if they so desire. Part 8 speaks to healthcare and facilities. Now, healthcare providers have a duty to provide healthcare without discriminating because of the person's disability. In particular, healthcare providers shall maintain the following minimum standards. So there should be equitable access to the range and standard of affordable health services. So access to a standard of affordable health services, and this includes sexual and reproductive health services. Health services should be provided which are needed because of the disability. So this would include screening, early detection, treatment, rehabilitation, and intervention. The part 9 now looks at premises and housing. So the owner or the agent of private premises who rents or intends to rent their premises has a duty to ensure that the premises is accessible to the person with a disability. There is a form in the regulations which permits a person with a disability to apply to their landlord to ask them for permission to retrofit or to make adjustments to the property. So the person with a disability can do that. But the starting point is that the Act puts a responsibility on the owner of the premises to make the place accessible for the person with a disability. Nevertheless, if for some reason the owner may not be available, the person with a disability can apply to that person to make the adjustments themselves. Now, if you are the owner or agent of a public or commercial premises, it should be accessible as far as it relates to the entrance, the bathroom, telephones, drinking fountains, and emergency exits. These are specified by the Act. Now, any premises that is constructed or was constructed after February 14, 2022 should be accessible. So these things we referred to earlier in terms of the entrance, the bathroom, the telephones, drinking fountains, any building that was put up since February 14, 2022 should be fully compliant with these things. And if they are not, then they are breach. So section 38, this is the section I was telling you about, that the person with a disability can apply to the landlord to make the changes to the premises, right? And the Act goes on to tell you that the landlord must not unreasonably withhold their consent for you to make the changes. And this again is a matter for the DRT to determine whether or not the landlord is unreasonably withholding their consent. Now, a person who is selling, leasing, or otherwise doing away with property must not refuse to rent or to sell their property to somebody with a disability. So they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't, because they have a disability, I'm not going to sell my property, I'm not going to rent my property. No, that must not be done. If that is done, whether by what is said or how things are handled, then that would be a breach of the Act, and someone who has faced that can make a complaint. All right. Right, so this slide is also making a similar point that where the person is managing a premises, they must also not manage it in a way that it discriminates against a person with a disability, whether through evicting the person because they have a disability, subjecting them to any disadvantage, restricting how they can use the property. So you may go to a hotel, for example, because it says managing a premises or a facility. You visit a hotel, but all the hotels have is stairs, and so certain places where everybody else can go, you can't because maybe you use a wheelchair. That is a discriminatory act that would have happened, because that now prevents or prohibits you from participating generally with everybody else. Part 10 speaks to public passenger vehicles. Now, the Minister of Transportation has the responsibility to ensure that persons with disabilities can travel the roadways, not only the roadways, whether it's by road, rail, air, or water, these things should be accessible to persons with disabilities. Part 11, no, this part of the Act has what they call some miscellaneous provisions. So this is pretty much just speaking to some other provisions under the law that should be considered. Section 41 speaks to the fact that the Act does not limit a person from offering to a person with a disability any health insurance, any life insurance, any insurance against accident, or any type of other kind of insurance. So persons with disabilities can receive that. That point continues there. No, section 43 says, if a person is able to prove to the satisfaction of the court or the DRT for them to make a reasonable arrangement does amount to a disproportionate or undue burden, then the government now has the duty to facilitate the needs of the person with a disability. So in other words, if you have requested reasonable arrangements and the person said, no, it's an undue burden or it's disproportionate, and the matter was brought before the Disability Rights Tribunal and they agree that it is an undue burden or it's disproportionate, then at that point, it now becomes a responsibility of the government to facilitate the needs of the person with a disability. Section 48 is pretty much saying what I said earlier, that the act is to be reviewed within 3 years. Section 49 specifies that the act binds the Crown. So the government is also subjected to the provisions of the Disabilities Act. Section 50 speaks to existing premises. Now, what has happened is that existing premises are premises that were built before February 14, 2022. So remember, I said earlier that those that are built after February 14 or since February 14, 2022 should be fully compliant. But what the act had done was to give premises which were in existence before February 14, 2022 a 2-year grace period to become compliant. Now that 2-year, 24-month period would have expired February 13, 2024. And so if we have any buildings now that are not compliant, they would be in breach. Now, Section 51 speaks to an amendment to the Legal Aid Act, because pretty much what it provides is that a person with a disability who wants to enforce an award of the Disability Rights Tribunal is entitled to legal aid. So if your matter goes to the Disability Rights Tribunal, and for some reason the person against whom the award is made is not compliant, you can seek and obtain the assistance of attorneys from the Legal Aid Council to enforce your award that you receive from the Disability Rights Tribunal. Now, Part 3 of the Act establishes a complaints pathway. So the Act is made up of 11 sections, and we've been through all the sections except Part 3. I wanted to do this one last. So we looked at Part 1, which is the definitions. We looked at Part 2, which speaks about the role of the council. We looked at Parts 4 to 10, which speaks about the rights of persons with disabilities. So the right not to be discriminated, the right to housing, all those things. Those took us from Part 4 to Part 10. Part 11 looked at the miscellaneous provisions. So the miscellaneous was like the 2-year grace period for buildings to be compliant and so forth. Part 3, the final part. Now this one creates a complaints pathway, and it establishes a Disability Rights Tribunal. Now, the tribunal has a chairman and it has a deputy chairman. A person may complain to the JCPD. The complaint has to be in writing. That's the first thing. Now, the person with a disability can make a complaint or their caregiver. Yeah, and remember, we look at the definition for caregiver, very broad, but it must be in writing. The JCPD is in the process of creating a complaints form, because that would capture all that we need. But you don't have, and we are encouraging the use of the complaints form once it's finalized. However, what is really required is that the complaint is in writing. So if you don't have access to the complaint form, still send your complaint once it is in writing. It's acceptable. Now, if you have a complaint, you have to make that complaint within 2 years after the incident happened. So we are now in, today's February 28th. If you had a complaint that happened February 15th, 2022, and you did not make that complaint, you would not be able to complain now, because 2 years has passed. So you must make the complaint within 2 years. While I'm on that point, let me also say, because we have had persons asking us whether, if the issue arose before the Disabilities Act took effect, whether they can complain about that. That's a legal question, and it has to be answered by the Attorney General Chamber. The council has written to them seeking their advice on it, because the act itself does not say that. So we are not at this moment able to, based on what the act says, we're not able to take any complaint that happened before the act took effect. So before February 14, 2022, subject to what the Attorney General will tell us. Now, you may make a complaint because 1, you have experienced an act of discrimination. 2, someone has failed to comply with a provision under a code of practice that was issued. 3, someone has failed or refused to offer an insurance, a pension, or an investment benefit in the right manner to the person with a disability, or they have breached any other provision of the Disabilities Act. So those are the 4 bases on which a complaint may be made to the council. Once the act is breached, you may make a complaint. If someone has issues in the way in which the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities has handled a particular matter, you can make a report in that regards to the Office of the Public Defender, because we are a statutory government body subject to the Public Defenders Act, like other government entities. Now, if the JCPD believes that there has been a breach of the Disabilities Act, we will assist the person with making their complaint. But the JCPD does not provide legal representation to make your complaint. So we take the complaints, we receive them. That's our role. We receive the complaints, and if someone with a disability comes in and they can't write it or some challenges and they're unable to produce it, we will assist with putting the complaint together. We make an appointment and we'll assist with that, but we do not provide legal representation in this regard. So when people complain to us, we are not a person's legal representatives. But what we do, though, is to facilitate the complaints process, and we investigate the complaints pursuant to our mandate under the Act. The dispute resolution procedures. Right, so Section 18, we investigate the complaints, as was said. And we can also terminate a complaint if, having investigated it, we find that there has not been a breach of the Act. There's an exception to that, where if the minister has directed us, then we cannot terminate without his approval. Dispute resolution procedure. The tribunal may hear a complaint in the absence of a party once it is satisfied that due notice of the hearing was served. So, in other words, if the Disability Rights Tribunal is hearing a matter and they are satisfied that one of the parties was served notice of the matter, but for one reason or another they have not appeared, the tribunal can go ahead and hear the complaint in the absence of that party. The JCPD, after we have done our investigation, we may either send the matter to the Disability Rights Tribunal for determination, or if the parties consent, you recall when I told you about mediation and conciliation and those things, negotiation, you have to consent. So the same ADR, the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, with the consent of the parties, we can send those matters there. And when I say there, the places that offer these kind of services, we're thinking of the Dispute Resolution Foundation. The Ministry of Justice has a social justice unit too, which we will be including in the process in terms of resolving matters outside of a tribunal, for those matters that can be resolved and for persons who are willing to resolve within that way. Now, after the tribunal hears a matter, it may make any order it seems fit. These orders include, it can make a declaration stating the rights of each party in the matter. It can make an order for compensation, even if one party did not attend the hearing. It can make an order for the respondent, which is the person against whom the complaint is made, to take certain steps within a certain time. And it may also return the matter to us, the JCPD, to say, let this matter be resolved through mediation, through negotiation, any of the alternative dispute resolution. So even when we send it to them, they could send it back to us to say, refer this matter to ADR. Now, JCPD do not provide ADR services, none at all. But what we do is that we facilitate. So we facilitate it through maintaining contact with the Dispute Resolution Foundation or the Ministry of Justice, Social Justice unit. So we will set it up, we'll make the arrangement, but we're not a part of the process of what happens, nor do we provide the services. Now, once a matter is referred to the DRT, it may order that the action complainant be seized and not be carried out, right? So it's not an injunction, but they can say no longer do what you have been doing. Again, and this section is speaking to the alternative dispute resolution that we just shared. Again, there must be consent, and JCPD does not offer alternative dispute resolution services. Now, the information disclosed in the alternative dispute resolution proceedings cannot be shared before the Disability Rights Tribunal unless the person agrees. So when you go to a mediation or any one of those kinds of resolution formats, whatever is said there is subject to confidentiality. It cannot be shared. So if you went to mediation and the matter wasn't resolved, and so you have to go to the tribunal. Now, when you get to the tribunal, you cannot share information that is not your information to share unless the other party would have agreed. Everything there is strictly confidential unless the other party, the person who gave the information, agrees. Now, this section 22 speaks to the situation where a decision is made by the tribunal, but for one reason or another, the respondent, the person against whom the decision is made, is not complying. In this case, the JCPD may assist the complainant to take that matter to the Supreme Court to enforce the decision of the tribunal. All right. So in this sense, in offering this assistance, the JCPD may arrange for the provision of legal advice. It may arrange for legal or other representation. It may seek to procure the settlement of any dispute, and it may provide or arrange for the provision of any other legal assistance which it thinks appropriate. So this is where you've got an order from the tribunal, but the respondent is not compliant. You can enforce it in the Supreme Court. The JCPD can assist you with that part, whether directly or through a third party. So maybe through legal aid, but you can obtain assistance in that regard. Once the JCPD would have offered that kind of assistance, whatever sum is awarded to the complainant in the Supreme Court, JCPD is entitled to a share of that cost. Yeah, and so we would share that proportionately accordingly. All right, well, that is the extent of my presentation. I hope it was not too long. Thank you for your attentiveness. Did I stick to my time?
Oh, it was good. It was perfect. It worked out well. Thank you so much, Janelle, for your presentation. It was really a lot of details, the time to process and think. So now we have 2 questions that the public sent in. One question, I think you have already answered it. Reasonable arrangement. How does that match persons with disabilities? And the other was the role of the Justice of the Peace. Can they support a person with disability to get access with the Disabilities Act? What is the role of the Justice of the Peace in terms of the Disabilities Act? Janelle, is there any role for the Justice of the Peace?
Well, under the Act, Justice of the Peace Association is not mentioned. However, we do know that as a practice in our country, Justices of the Peace offer assistance. When they go to the police station and all kind of things, they are integrally involved in our society. So they are not mentioned under the Act. But when you say assistance, what kind of assistance is the person thinking that you would need from a JP?
That was actually a public question, so I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. So they're not named under the Act, but certainly the JCPD is open to partnering with any entity that could advance the cause of persons with disabilities. So if we are able to sit down with them to see how best, because we know we have JPs in every island, in every parish across the island, and so they are integral to communities. They can reach everyone wherever because of how integral they are in communities. So they're not under the Act, but the JCPD is open to partnering with them to ensure access to persons with disabilities. That's how I'd answer that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Your presentation was really good for the general disabled community. But I have a question specific for the deaf community, because the deaf community is truly diverse. Do you have a different, we know the General Disabilities Act, but we want to focus on the deaf community. What are the specific points? If you could just give us like a short summary as what's specifically there for the deaf community in terms of the Disabilities Act.
How the act is worded, it doesn't identify a particular type of disability in terms of the rights that are applicable. So all the rights I mentioned, discrimination, generally education and training, political and public life, transportation, etc. All of those rights are applicable to every type of disability. So persons who are deaf can pull from those things because it is applicable to them. Reasonable arrangements too are applicable to persons with disabilities, and what will determine the reasonable arrangement for you will depend on the type of disability that you have. So that's where that would come in. So if you're seeking to access somewhere and it's inaccessible and you're now asking for a reasonable arrangement, then you would now say to the tribunal, because I am deaf, this is what I require. So that's where the distinction would come in. Somebody who is blind will say, because I am blind, this is the type of reasonable arrangement I require. So that's where the distinction comes in. But generally, it doesn't matter your disability. Each person with a disability is entitled to the same fundamental rights as every other person. But the difference will certainly come in when you ask for the type of arrangement that you would need to help you and to make things accessible for you.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. Any questions from the panel? Any questions from the community, or we can just go ahead with the program? Okay. I want to add one important point to ensure that whenever information is shared, I recognize that we have a Disabilities Act, but you know that Jamaica has many issues, but out of many, one people is our motto. We're diverse. And so the material, the information, the access, do they have it? Do they understand what it truly means? Can blind people access it? Can deafblind people access it? Can deaf people access it? Can hard of hearing people access it? Those are some considerations that we have to think about the different diverse groups, because the issue is really communication. How do we engage the communication that is needed and the discussions that is needed with the DRT? So thank you, Ms. Williams. Thank you so much, Janelle. I will introduce the panel next. So we're moving forward with the panel. With us there are two, there's supposed to be 3 deaf persons, but one couldn't show up. There was unforeseen circumstances as to why he couldn't be a part of the panel, but we have 2 today. We'll give you a little bit of background on who they are. There's a man, his name is Christoph, last name Phillips. Who is Christoph? Recently, he graduated from the Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts. He graduated, he got his degree there. He was born in Kingston, Jamaica. What does he do on his leisure time? He likes to travel. He enjoys traveling. He loves table tennis, adventures. He loves to go to the different parishes all over Jamaica. He recently got an award as a Dean's Special Award. He was honored for academic excellence. So going forward, we want to work with, if you want to work with a choreographer, a dancer, if you want to impact people's lives, he wants to teach deaf culture as a part of that. Here is Christoph. He's on the screen. Hi, Christoph. Applause. I'm a Black man with black dreads. My background is yellow. My shirt is navy blue with light blue flowers all over it. And my name is Christoph. Welcome, Christoph. Thank you. We'll also have a short introduction of another person. She's a woman. Her name is Shireen McIntyre. This is her sign name. She grew up in Portland. She's from Portland. She has a lot of brothers and sisters, a lot of siblings. And she was located in St. Anne and St. Mary. And then she settled in St. Catherine. She grew up hearing, and at the age of 7, she got meningitis, lost her hearing at that age. She didn't give up. She was still motivated. Her goal was to become a social worker. She has leadership skills. She went to the Lissamere Gilby, got involved, graduated. She became head girl at the Lissamere Gilby High School for the Deaf. Her first job was at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. And then she transferred to JAD, and she was doing project support with the deaf and hard of hearing and English language. And then she became a DCF, a teacher's assistant at Annie Williams School for the Deaf, where she worked 11 years there. And she recognized that deaf children, bigger deaf children need help. Teenage deaf children, not only education, but also emotional, psychological, social, economical, not just educational assistance. Our children don't only need that. They need all forms of support to make them a complete, holistic deaf person. So she went back to school to develop her education. She became a social worker. You can do anything you want to do and to qualify to become a social worker. She was qualified by, she doesn't have a bachelor's or a master's degree, but she had a calling and she was patient. She didn't have it at the beginning, but she was patient and she invested her time. She's also passionate about God's will and what he wants. And she will continue to follow and serve him and continue to do her work as a social worker. And she's planning to support the entire deaf community. She got her bachelor's degree from the Theological Seminary. She graduated November 2023. Now she works at the Jamaica Association for the Deaf in the Social Services Department. She works there. Here is Shireen. Hello. Describe yourself, Shireen, please. Okay, I am Shireen McIntyre, that's my name sign. I am dark brown. My hair is braided. My background is cream. I have on a white blouse and I wear glasses as well. And red earrings, Christoph says. Christoph says red earrings as well. Big red earrings, okay. Those are panelists. We'll be having a discussion. So Shereen and Christopher are now on the screen. Recently, Janelle explained from JCPD the law, the Disability Act, what it is in general, but this discussion is zoning in and focusing on the deaf community. It's the general deaf community, not only culturally deaf, but deaf, deafblind, deaf hard of hearing, deaf. It's a diverse community. So we want to ask you to your understanding of the Disabilities Act. What do you understand from it? Okay, I'm Christoph. My understanding of the Disabilities Act is that you have rights to whatever that is needed. They can't deny me my rights. The law says that. So if it's education, if it's school, healthcare, different things that whatever I need access, they can't deny me that right. They have to and if I have a problem, I have to report it, complain, and then there'll be steps for it to be solved. Shereen? My understanding of the Disabilities Act is it makes access easier for all persons with disabilities, the diverse disability groups, whether you're deaf, deafblind, blind, physically disabled, intellectually disabled. It will help make things easier for persons with disabilities because some of them are not able to voice. But now we have something, social justice, that can be voiced for them, also a law, an act. If you have a problem, we can write and make a complaint. So more access to communication, also a guide to the services that are provided. That's my understanding of the Disabilities Act. Based on your understanding of what was said, have you ever experienced any barriers, any discrimination, anything that made you feel, wow? Anything that has controlled your personal experience when growing up? Christoph? For me, yes. With Edna Manley College, when I went in, I needed certain things, for example, an interpreter, closed captioning. It was a struggle. We needed it. We needed that access. We just have to be sitting down. Things were going over our head. We didn't have that access. That was a huge barrier and a huge struggle for us, and we needed them to fix that. And they tried and eventually came through, but that was a struggle. That was an experience at Edna Manley. My challenge growing up with hearing loss was in the world, I face a lot of challenges, not only in school, but also in the workplace. Also going to buy things in the supermarkets, in the stores, the doctor, the clinic, many barriers, many social spaces, the educational barriers. I face discrimination. I face oppression, autism, marginalization. I've experienced that as well. And as an adult, I'm still facing that. I use the opportunity to educate people if they're willing to listen, if they're willing to understand, if they're willing to question, and I'm willing to answer and share. But you still have some ignorance. some ignorant people, but I do my part to explain, to try and educate, and then leave it up to them. It's their choice to do what they want to do. I can't force them, but at the same time, you have to respect my space and respect the space of anyone who has a disability or a deaf person. You have both experienced that. So you think the disabilities app that has already been published? Do you think other deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, deaf people, what ideas would you suggest to them? For example, in health, Christoph already mentioned education. What about healthcare? What about going to the doctor? How did you experience? Do you mind repeating? You have already experienced, you struggled through college, interpreting, support, you needed closed caption, you fought for that and you got through. Shireen has experienced not understanding. She had struggles with her educational opportunity. And now that the law has been passed and gazetted, the general deaf community, the diverse deaf community that is in there, how do we empower them, plus the hearing society, to provide access to healthcare and educational services, whether you're a doctor or a nurse. Shireen, you can focus on health. Christoph, maybe you can focus on education. I'll try. So I think for education, we need to let them know what the act says. We need to keep educating them about the act. Education is important. And we also need to educate the diverse deaf community that we have, the deaf blind, the hard of hearing, etc. We must know the law, accept the law, and own the law so that they can advocate for themselves. Right, Christoph? Yes. Shireen? For me, how can we educate the public in terms of healthcare? For doctors, sensitization is important. Sensitization, that's a priority. It's very important. Education, sensitization. Also, we have a different pathway as to how to work with them. We can't just sensitize them one time. We have to do it often because people will forget. So you have to keep sensitizing. Have different workshops pop up every now and then. Allow it to be sustainable and continuous. That would be more effective. Thank you, Christoph and Shireen. Said sensitization, advocacy, owning it. In today's world, technology is really advanced. How can technology and the barrier of lack of access to communication between the hearing society and the deaf community merge? How can technology help us to communicate easier? I agree technology is advanced. I want to see more access. For example, if I go to a health care fair or, there's an interpreter there that we can communicate if I go to a clinic or something. There is communication accessible and ready. We don't want to be frustrated and stuck, so we need more technology to be involved. For example, we need the box on the TV to be a little bit bigger. The interpreter is too small. So that access can be clear than this small box that we struggle to look at. Those are some areas of improvement that's needed. Thank you, Shireen. Repeat the question, please. Technology. how would you use technology to support communication between the Hearing Society and the Deaf Society? Because right now there's a lack of communication between both worlds. So can we use technology to connect? So how can technology bridge the gap? Right now we can use the phones for access to communicate. I understand that not all deaf persons are literate, not all can read English. So communication will need videos as well, using GSL, explaining things. So videos. For those who can read, we can use closed captioning, word and text, but still be conscious of the use of video as well. I think that's one way how we can bridge the communication gap between the hearing and the deaf. Another is interpreters, depending on where the access is. If you're able to use the interpreter, finding a place that provides interpreting services. So we, for example, where I work, deaf persons outside these services to go to the doctor. The doctor should be ready to call the GP and let them know that we have a deaf person here. Are you able to provide and send an interpreter or something? We need to establish communication for that. Sometimes they'd rather to be alone with the doctor. Maybe it's good if a doctor would learn sign language. That would be good. But some deaf persons would prefer that as well. I agree. So using interpreters on online, how do we communicating comfortable is important to understanding the language and recognizing that sign language is different from written English. Jamaican Sign Language is different from written English. That's important. We have to do both to represent the diverse groups and their preferred method of communication. Thank you. There are many questions from the audience. Are you ready? The first question is, should radio stations provide interpreter services, especially on their YouTube? Because they have their YouTube live. Should they provide interpreting services? Christoph, yes, they should, because we need to know what's happening daily. We need to see and know what's happening daily. We need to know what's happening tomorrow. So I think they should provide interpreting services. Yes, they should. Well, let's start with doing an analysis as to how many deaf persons are interested in radio. Because sometimes radio is there, but we don't understand. Maybe we need to do a statistical analysis to know the location, if it's Mobay, if it's Kingston, and provide interpreter. Because yeah, deaf people want to know what's happening. Most times we're like left behind, left in the dark. We have to depend on our co-workers or friends or families to tell us what's happening. We don't get to garner and get the information for ourselves. So I think it's something that should be provided. Okay, thank you, thank you. Any other question? There are more questions, yes. Every year, my organization hosts different events. And we invite the deaf community to come out, but no one comes out. Should we still provide interpreting services even though no deaf person comes? maybe the deaf community didn't know about the event. So maybe the promotion needs to be ramped up so that they will go to the event. And then you can provide an interpreter. But if you bring an interpreter and there is nobody at the event, that would probably be a waste of funds. So most deaf people don't know about the event, so the promotion is important. Sherry, as Christoph said, it's poor advertising. If there is an event, contact the agency or the people who you know deal with the deaf community. And that way, we will make access for the deaf community. We'll promote the information. For example, we had an event, we will some events will contact the JAD, but it depends on which company. They contact, let us know, and we will create a flyer with the information. And the second thing I do is record a video. That way, more deaf people will come. If you don't promote it, or if the quality of the promotion is poor, it will impact the attendance of the deaf community. It's important to promote strongly so that deaf people can know what's happening, and to ensure that interpreting services is provided. Also, if it's a public event, it should still provide an interpreter. Correct? That's what you both said? Correct. Great. Communication is important. Communication is important. Thank you. Any more questions? This situation happened already. A family had a deaf child that lived really far from school. The distance was really far. The deaf child couldn't go to school because the distance was far. What do you do in a situation like that? Does the family have to move closer to the school? Or do you send your child to live and board near to the school? Or do you place the child in a hearing school? Or is there any other idea? Please comment, I'm Shireen, and then continue. Please do that when you're to identify yourself, and then go ahead and speak, so that we can know so everyone has access. We know who is speaking. So Shireen McIntyre, where I work, we get that type of information about deaf children being far from schools. And we try to discuss and explain and provide information that we have options. We have locations, different locations, to see what's closest to the individual or to the family, and then place them. But something that we have to understand is that not all the schools are connected to the Jamaica Association for the Deaf. We have other deaf schools that are private. So we explain the list of all the schools, and then we leave the decision to the family, and the family decides which school they choose. So whether they place them in a boarding institution, because we do have boarding institutions on the island, or whether they try to find a family member who lives close by, who doesn't mind keeping the child during school time. But we can't force the family to relocate because of the child needs to go to that school. We try and find a solution and provide advice as to see what's best for the child and the family. Because I grew up in St. Mary. When I lost my hearing, I lived in St. Mary. There was no school nearby. Did a hearing test at JAD. They recommended me to go to St. Christopher's. And I boarded there, and I went home when it was time to go home. So that's my experience. Thank you, Shireen. There are options. You have boarding institutions, or if there's a family member close by, those are the options. Christoph, do you have anything to add? No. Shireen answered sufficiently clearly. Okay, great. There's one more question. The history and the goal is education. What's your inspired hope for the education? Sorry about that. Jamaica's history, educational, different events happening. What's your hope for education in Jamaica? The point is education. What improvements do you see in education in Jamaica? Christoph, you recently graduated, so I want to see more deaf people graduating from university. Now we only have a few, I could say. Most female graduate, most deaf females graduate. I want to see more male deaf graduates. I want to see more deaf blind graduates here in Jamaica, not leaving and going away, but graduating here in Jamaica. I want the power here in Jamaica. That's my wish and hope for our educational system in Jamaica. Which means the university is providing access, right? Yes, they're providing communication access. Is it good? Is it smooth or is it shaky? I would say I see other universities accepting deaf people, but I want to see more like Michael Teachers College. I want it to be all the universities accepting all wherever the deaf person wants to go. We have to advocate, sensitize, encourage them to accept the deaf community, and that's yeah, and that yeah. The deaf community, it seems as if we always have to be advocating. And we always have to keep reminding and encouraging and promoting our needs. Shireen, you have anything to add? Yes, I want to add. So with education, before I worked in school, yes, my experience growing up in a deaf school, it was a struggle with the educational department. But now, during my time working, I recognize that there is more advocacy and more advocates with the Ministry of Education trying to retrofit the curriculum to fit the deaf community. It's not that the deaf community can't learn, they can, but it's just in a different way. So people who are in the educational system, also I believe some people who work at JAD, they try to advocate, please fix this, please adjust this, and we finally have a curriculum for the deaf. No, we don't, but we're still working on that. And the structure has improved. The infrastructure has improved. Before it was worse, but now we can see more content, more foundation. We have people who are advocating for the deaf community. And that's one thing that has made history. And another thing is educational level has tertiary. We are now there. People are going to university, Hart, Edna. If the foundation isn't fixed, it's hard to matriculate to tertiary. So I think one of the things that we have seen improved and we're proud of is the foundation being fixed. So it means we're creating history for future generations, for the deaf and the hard of hearing and the blind community to improve. I know we discussed education and healthcare a little bit. We're really destitute with time, but I wanted to just touch a little bit on employment. Jamaica, our society, there's a lot of hearing people, but the deaf community is really cute, really small, a small community, minority group. Deaf, blind, hard of hearing, it doesn't matter where you are, private or public companies. Do they employ deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind people? Are they readily employed? Is access provided for all? Is access provided all? Not just because of this specific group, but what's the strategy? What do the companies provide? What's provided out there? Christoph. I could say basic Jamaican Sign Language learning, basic Jamaican Sign Language, paying attention to the education strategy, also keeping eye contact if you're in a meeting with the interpreter and the interpreter is in the meeting, maintain eye contact with the deaf individual. I think those are two things that I can think of right now. Thank you. Shireen. With that, I work in the social services department, so speaking from experience, I work with another co-worker. We try to sensitize. We emphasize to companies and business and partners to be sensitized about the deaf community because many of them don't understand the deaf community. And there is a lot of misunderstandings between the groups, between the hearing and the deaf. So we empower them, we sensitize them, and we start with the basic foundation and we build and we add to that. And we have a relationship. That too, we also try to introduce them to the deaf community. We tell them about deaf events, what's happening. We invite them in different ways as to how to participate, how they can question, how they can partner, different strategies. And as Christoph said, it's important to pay attention to strategy because deaf people are visual learners. They're more visual learners, and deaf people depend on eyes, body language, facial expressions. So that's really important. We have to keep sensitizing the different groups. And also with we don't only focus on the employees and the employers, but we focus on the staff, the deaf person, to remind them of their role and encourage them to fit in and do their role properly at wherever they're employed. So you want that role, we encourage them to ensure that they do the job that is required of them. We also help to find schools, for example, Hearts, where we train them in skills before we can place them in jobs. Thank you, Shireen. Sensitization is really important, plus advocacy training for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Deaf-blind community is important as well. Interpreter for meetings, want full access for everybody, not just for the deaf, but for the hearing as well. The hearing person needs to know what the deaf person is saying. There needs to be full access both ways. And visual material and resources so that they can understand what's being said. That's it? Yes, yes. Great. Thank you. Visual things linked to public places. For example, airports, supermarkets, entertainment, things that are visual, announcements, what's happening. The deaf person tends not to know what's happening. What do you think could be provided to provide access? What's the best way to provide information to know what's happening all around in the environment that you're in, whether airports, etc.? Airport, supermarket. For entertainment, I'm not sure. Maybe you would have an interpreter interpreting so you know what's happening. Airports and supermarkets have screen. When they're making public announcements, we don't know what's happening. So it's time for us to be able to see what's happening on screen. Technology is provided for that now, so that we can see whatever is being announced. I think that's something that's important. Thank you, Shereen. Different areas that you go for leisure or pleasure with an event. We have a contact here, a deaf person. They and the family wanted to go to, I can't remember exactly where, but the tour guide didn't have an understanding that, of the deaf community. So the deaf group went there, and what happened? They emailed them to let them know we're deaf, we're going there for fun. Are you able to provide an interpreter? The person said, don't understand what you mean, and then they explained the Disabilities Act, and it was the first time they were hearing about the Disabilities Act. I'm not sure how much Jamaican businesses or ventures know about the Disabilities Act, but again, there had to be some sensitization. And as Crystal said, they should use the screen to promote what messages are being said. They could have an area where they have an interpreter there. For example, if that information is repetitive, just have a person come in, sign that information, and then they just keep the interpreter there. For the airport, I would really like not just the airport, but I'd really like them to come on board with the Disabilities Act. The deaf community, they need to know, they need to sensitize their staff and encourage them to participate in sign language classes so that we can have access. For example, in the airport, when you're booking your ticket and you're reserving your ticket and you put your deaf and I arrive at the airport, they start to write. I might understand, but not all deaf people will understand that. So they need to learn the basic communication skills so that they're able to communicate with deaf people. You have to consider the diverse ways as how to communicate with the different categories of people. The society is wide and not so that everybody can have access. You have to consider the diversity. That's what I'm hearing, right? Correct. We need to wrap up soon, but we have 1 or 2 more questions. I'm thinking maybe we need to ask Janelle Williams if she's still here, if she doesn't mind to come on screen, please. And the interpreter as well. A lot of companies want to know if they have to pay interpreters. They don't want to. Some of them say they have to. Some say, I don't know. I really didn't know. Or that's the government's responsibility to pay for interpreters. On a national level, what do we plan to do? On a government level, what do we plan to do to respond and sensitize the different groups about the need of an interpreter for the deaf community and the diverse needs that they have? Janelle, what are your thoughts? If you're here, please. Janelle, are you here? I think this morning she had some internet connectivity issues. Okay, while we wait for Janelle to come or not, do you guys have any thoughts to propose to the possibilities of what they should do, what the government needs to do for companies who don't have money, or for companies who do, but say, it's the government's responsibility? What do we do? Do we partner? Do we collaborate? What do we do? Any thoughts, Christoph and Shireen? With that, recently, 2 weeks ago, we had a situation. That situation, that's an interpreter. That situation include the police. And what I got to understand is the situation didn't work. When I researched and found out, the police station, they had an issue with the deaf person because they couldn't get an interpreter, because they were speaking, but the interpreter was signing. But the problem is they didn't want to pay for the interpreter. This police, they're supposed to pay for the interpreter, and they say yes. So I said, I am asking why they didn't want to pay with the budget plan for the year. They have a budget. They give them a budget for the disabled community, but it's not for the deaf community alone, it's for the entire disabled community for service. And the police provide service, so they should be ready to have some funds to pay for the disabled community, because it seems as if they don't want to pay for that service. And they themselves don't have the deep knowledge that they need to know about the disabled community. They're not that educated. Yes, they have some sign language class, but the foundation, do they understand the details, or they just learn the basics in sign language? That's what I'm trying to understand. That's something I'm researching, because if they provide the service to the public, including the disabled community and the deaf, they should know how to approach the situation. You can't be there in training to come and protect and defend me and you're not finished training. So that's an area I think they need to work on. So I'm still researching about that to understand more. Thank you. Christoph, from my experience with the Edna Manley, I remember one interpreter decided to migrate and they replaced the interpreter. And while we were there, we kept telling them we need an interpreter, but they kept saying, we don't have any money, we don't have any money. We can't afford to pay an interpreter full time. Monthly, we can't afford. And I thought the government would pay. That was my assumption. No, I realized that it was lack of funding. So when they finally found an interpreter and brought in the interpreter, they don't have a degree, they have a certificate. They said, sorry, I can't hire you. They say, why? If the government have to pay them, you have to have a degree, but if they don't have a degree, they can't be paid. I'm not comfortable. So they tried to think how, and they decided to do fundraising themselves, collected some funds, and that money was used to pay an interpreter. But that's something that happen, maybe fundraising is a part of something that could be done, but something that situation has to be fixed. That's something that I saw and witnessed. It seems as if some are willing, but they don't have the funds. The funds is the issue, correct? Based on what is being said. And some are looking for a qualified person so that they can pay them. All right. So you're meaning we need to solve those three things. Do you have any idea as to how we can solve them? How to find funding to pay the interpreter for the national level? How do we solve that problem? Because Jamaica is out of many one people. That's our motto. It's for everybody. Doesn't exclude some. And we have a Disabilities Act. So how do we solve that problem? What's the suggestion? I'm trying to fix my thoughts. Okay. I believe that an agency or an association that commits to working, serving the deaf community, that's their responsibility to advocate, to voice for all who really need the help with interpreting. Can't depend on the deaf person to fight through for everything, to advocate for what's the purpose of having an agency, an association that sits there if that's their job to advocate. I think they have to do the advocacy. Advocacy also means working with the deaf community and finding ways. What's their challenges? What do you need? What are your needs? What is the greatest need? And working on that. Different places that you can go partner with government bodies. Really, I think it has to start with the agency or the association. That's my belief. Christoph? I want to add what Shireen said. Maybe we can have a fundraising every year and create a dedicated fund and save for that. That's one way. Shireen, add in. My question, how much government bodies understand the importance of an interpreter? As a government, I'm running the country, I'm doing these things, but recognizing the deaf community, understanding the needs of the deaf community, interpreting access, I'm not sure. We need to make sure that they understand. They think that the deaf community is fine. They don't understand our struggles. They don't understand that we have to pay. So we need to have a conversation, a roundtable discussion to find a way how to get the information and have a discussion with them so that they can understand our situation and walk in our shoes. I'm hearing you're commenting about the different groups that need to come together, agencies, the different groups that need to come together to provide access for the diverse deaf community, and different ways how to budget to support the diverse deaf community's needs, and how to have a conversation with government bodies on strategic planning and support that the community needs in terms of communication. So I'm going to close This is with the last question. For 2030, jump to year 2030, what do you think that looks like for the deaf community? What do you want 2030 to look like for the deaf community? Christoph, in the year 2030, I want all barriers down, everything open, access everywhere, ready. No barriers, everything going smoothly, communication, access in emergency services, technology, ready for medical services, financial services, access everywhere, every barrier down. That's what I want to see in 2030. Thank you, Christoph. Shireen? Christian, answer the question for the both of us. Christoph has answered the question for the both of us. Christoph is a real dancer because when him start move a while of facial expression, body movement, everything, he answered the question for the both of us, yes. Someone commented on YouTube saying, the government needs to invest in training more. The government needs to invest in interpreter training because there's a shortage of interpreters, needs to invest in interpreter training and needs to understand the purpose of deliberate effort. Inclusion all the way. Not just talk, but real substance. Inclusion all the way. Thank you to Tisha Clark, whoever commented. Another person commented and said, first and foremost, government needs that activity to be a part of their agenda to learn Jamaican Sign Language. They should learn Jamaican Sign Language. And we need a JSL, to add, Christoph, we need a JSL curriculum in all high schools. We need a JSL curriculum established in all the high schools. Thank you, thank you. That's all for today. Thank you, Shireen and Christoph. Thank you for the support. Thank you for sharing the information with the public. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thanks to Janelle for her presentation this morning, explaining the Disabilities Act, what it means. Thanks to the community, the deaf community, the hard of hearing, the deafblind, the hearing allies with us. Thanks to the community itself. Thanks to Jamaica, the country itself. And remember our national motto, out of many, one people. Thank you. Thank you, audience. Thank you for participating. Thank you for paying attention. And thanks to the interpreter, the amazing interpreter, Michaela and Tony. Good job. Thank you to the JAD for hosting this webinar. And thank you to everyone. Have a good day. Bye.